The heavy shuffle of boots echoed through the old auction barn. Dust hung in the air like it hadn't moved in years. The scent of manure, sweat, and sawdust soaked into every timber beam overhead. Beneath a faded sign that read "Livestock Auction," a chestnut quarter horse lay flat on the dirt, legs bandaged, ribs visible, and eyes dull. He wasn't up for sale as much as he was up for disposal. Then came the sound nobody expected, the tapping of a cane. Steady, slow, and determined. Every cowboy turned as an elderly woman stepped into the ring. Dorothy, Mae Walker, 78 years old, wearing a worn-out purple sweater and dark slacks tucked into old orthopedic shoes. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face carried decades of loss. No one spoke. They just watched. She didn't glance at the auctioneer or the dozen ranchers leaning over the railing. Her eyes locked on the horse. "Buckshot," she whispered under her breath. The animal didn't move, not at first, but when she stepped closer, his ears twitched. One tired eye slowly opened. For a second, the old gelding looked like he remembered something, or someone. Dot lowered herself as much as her knees would allow and touched his shoulder. "You still in there, boy?" Her voice cracked with more than age. From the rail above, Clayton Briggs, the man running the auction, scoffed. "Ma'am, that horse is used up. He can't stand, can't be ridden, can't breed. We're gonna put him down before nightfall. Ain't worth a cent." Dot didn't answer. She pulled a cloth pouch from her coat pocket and let it fall beside her on the dirt. A few wrinkled bills spilled out. Some loose change. And a faded photo of a young man on Buckshot's back, smiling proud. "He was my son's horse," she said softly. "And my son never got to say goodbye." The barn went silent. Even Clayton shifted uncomfortably. No one had anything to say, because there was nothing to say. Dot didn't beg, but her presence was louder than any plea. She stayed there, hand on the horse, heart somewhere back in time. Then, slowly, Buckshot moved. A grunt came from deep in his chest. He tucked one leg beneath him. The second followed. The old quarter horse was trying to stand. The room held its breath. Dust floated like snow in the sunlight streaming through the high windows. Buckshot groaned low and deep, his muscles trembling beneath his chestnut coat. His legs, wrapped in worn bandages, twitched like they were trying to remember how to be strong again. Dot didn't move, didn't blink. She just watched, her knuckles white around the top of her cane, whispering something only the horse could hear. From the rail above, a younger rancher in his 40s muttered, "Damn horse's gonna break every bone tryin' to get up." Clayton Briggs shot him a glare, but didn't speak. His arms were crossed, jaw tight. He wasn't sure what he was watching, but it wasn't just a horse trying to stand. It was something heavier, something holy. Buckshot strained again. His front legs buckled, but his back hooves scraped the dirt, dragging him forward just a little. The whole barn was frozen. Dot stepped back, barely able to keep her balance. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "You don't have to prove nothin'. Not to them. Just to me." Her voice broke in the middle of the sentence. No one in that barn had ever seen a horse cry, but right then it felt like Buckshot might. His breath came in short, rattling bursts, but his eyes were wide open now. Focused. Alive. Flashbacks swirled through Dot's mind like a windstorm. Her son, Jacob, had ridden Buckshot through every trail, every rodeo, every summer they had together. That horse wasn't just an animal. He was the last living piece of the boy she buried 6 winters ago after the tractor flipped on black ice. They'd told her to sell everything. Move to assisted living. Leave the ranch behind. But she hadn't. Because Buckshot was still out there somewhere, and she'd sworn to find him. One final heave, and the horse staggered onto 3 legs. He wobbled, nearly collapsed, then planted the 4th hoof like a flag into the ground. He stood. Not straight, not strong, but standing just the same. A long breath escaped Dot's chest, half relief, half disbelief. Around her, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. All those weathered cowboys, men raised on hard truths and harder land, looked down at the old woman and the horse and felt something they didn't have a name for. Clayton stepped down from the railing, jaw still set, voice quiet now. "Lady, you can't save every broken thing." Dot looked up, her eyes glassy but fierce. "I'm not trying to save everything," she replied. "Just the one that matters." Dot sat on a bale of hay outside the barn while the last sliver of sun melted over the horizon. Buckshot was tied loosely nearby, still standing, though barely, his legs trembling from the effort. She hadn't taken her eyes off him since the moment he rose. The barn was mostly empty now. The cowboys had left without a word, and Clayton was inside doing paperwork, pretending not to care. But something had changed in the air. Everyone had felt it. She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed and soft from years of being handled. It was Jacob's last letter, the one he'd left on the kitchen table the morning he died. She had read it 1,000 times, but now, sitting beside the horse he loved most, the words stung in a new way. "Ma, if anything ever happens to me, promise me you won't give up on Buckshot. He's stubborn, just like me, but he's got heart. He needs someone who sees that." Her hand trembled as she folded it again and tucked it back away. Inside the barn, Clayton glanced through the cracked door and watched her. There was something about the way she looked at that horse, like he wasn't just muscle and bone, but something sacred. He scratched the back of his neck, conflicted. The auction wasn't supposed to be about emotions. It was business. Always had been. But for some reason tonight, he couldn't get himself to pull the plug on the old gelding. He told his staff to hold off. Just until morning. Dot gently placed her hand on Buckshot's neck. His skin twitched, and he leaned into her touch. "You remember the trails behind the old barn, don't you?" she whispered. "Jacob used to race you through the trees so fast I thought you'd both fly off into the wind." Her eyes misted, but she smiled. For a moment, she wasn't an old woman anymore. She was just a mother, remembering the sound of her son's laughter echoing across open fields. Suddenly, Buckshot shifted. Not out of pain, but instinct. He turned his head and nudged Dot's shoulder gently with his muzzle, the way he used to with Jacob. She gasped, covering her mouth with one hand. That single gesture cracked something open inside her. Grief, love, guilt, all tangled into a knot she hadn't been able to loosen for years. From the barn, Clayton watched it all unfold. He looked down at the clipboard in his hands, and slowly tore the page listing Buckshot for disposal straight down the middle. Morning light crept over the hills like a slow breath, painting the barn in soft gold. The world felt quieter than usual, like it was holding space for something important. Was already awake, bundled in her sweater, seated on an overturned feed bucket just outside Buckshot's stall. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jacob, 16, wild-hearted, riding Buckshot bareback across their pasture like nothing could ever touch them. Buckshot stood, weak but upright. There was resolve in the way he held his head now, as if Dot's presence had reminded him who he used to be. She fed him slow, one handful of oats at a time, whispering to him like she was speaking to her son. "You came back to me," she murmured. "And maybe I came back to you too." In her hand, she still clutched the folded photo of Jacob. She hadn't let it go since the day before. Inside the office, Clayton stared at his black coffee like it had answers. He didn't know what bothered him more, that Dot had gotten under his skin, or that he respected her for it. He'd seen thousands of animals come through that auction. None had ever stood back up once they'd gone down. But that horse did. For her. He scratched his beard and looked at the torn auction sheet in the trash. Something told him this wasn't over. Later that morning, Dot walked slowly toward Clayton, her cane tapping rhythmically against the concrete. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her voice was steady. "I know he ain't worth much, but I'd like to take him home. I got just enough to rent a trailer and buy a bag of feed." She placed her pouch of crumpled bills on the desk in front of him, eyes never leaving his. It was barely $78. Not even half what they'd normally ask for a rescue fee. But Clayton didn't reach for it. "You really think you can care for him, Ms. Walker?" he asked, not unkindly. She nodded once. "He's all I've got left. And I think, maybe I'm all he's got too." There was something in her voice that sounded like truth. Not desperation, not pride, just truth. Clayton sighed, then stood. "Keep your money," he said, sliding the pouch back toward her. "You've already paid more than most ever do." Dot's hands trembled slightly as she took it back. She wanted to say thank you, but the words caught in her throat. Back in the stall, Buckshot turned his head as she approached, ears pricked toward her. She smiled, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. For the first time in years, Dorothy Mae Walker felt like she wasn't alone anymore. The trailer rocked gently as the old pickup crawled down the winding country road toward Dot's land. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the cottonwoods, casting long, golden shadows across the fields. Dot's hands gripped the steering wheel tight, her knuckles white, not from fear, but from hope. Hope that Buckshot would make it through the night. Hope that bringing him home would mean something more than just an old promise kept. The house came into view, a modest one-story rancher with chipped paint and sagging shutters. The barn in the back was leaning a little more than it used to, but the land was still alive. Acres of tall grass, fence posts bent with age, and the soft scent of hay drifting through the breeze. Dot parked near the gate and climbed slowly down, her legs stiff from the drive. She opened the trailer doors, and Buckshot looked out, blinking against the light like he was trying to remember this place. It took nearly an hour to get him down the ramp. His legs were shaky, and Dot had to coax him with every step, talking gently, holding his lead rope like it was made of porcelain. But he walked, limping, tired, but walking. Once in the paddock, he lifted his head and let out a low, breathy nicker. Dot's breath caught in her throat. He remembered. He knew. Later that night, Dot sat on the porch, watching him graze in the moonlight. A blanket was wrapped tight around her shoulders, and a cup of chamomile tea sat cooling beside her. She hadn't felt peace like this in years. But just as she started to let her heart settle, the sound of Buckshot's hooves stumbling snapped her upright. She rushed as fast as her cane would allow, the porch steps creaking under her weight. Buckshot was down again, this time in the middle of the pasture. He lay on his side, breathing hard, sweat darkening his coat. Dot dropped beside him, ignoring the pain in her knees. "No," she whispered, cradling his head. "Not now. You made it home. Please, Buckshot. Not like this." Tears ran down her cheeks, silent and warm. The horse twitched once, then went still. Dot pressed her forehead to his. "Stay with me, boy. Just a little longer." The stars above blurred through her tears, and in the stillness of that open field, she realized something terrifying. Maybe bringing Buckshot home wasn't the ending. Maybe it was just the beginning of the hardest part. The air was still when Dot woke on the couch just before dawn, a half-empty bottle of liniment by her side and a blanket falling from her shoulders. She wasn't sure how long she'd been asleep. All she remembered was collapsing beside Buckshot in the pasture hours earlier, whispering prayers into the dark sky. Her bones ached as she stood, and her heart pounded with dread as she limped toward the field, cane stabbing into the earth with each step. Buckshot was still lying down, but his ears twitched at the sound of her voice. Relief swept through her like warm rain. She knelt beside him, gently brushing his mane away from his eyes. "You stayed," she whispered. "Stubborn old fool, just like Jacob." She let out a small laugh, more breath than sound, and wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. He was alive, weak, broken, but alive. She managed to get him a few sips of water from a bucket and laid fresh hay close enough for him to nibble. As she worked, her mind drifted to the past again, the long summers when Jacob would gallop across those same fields, yelling from the porch for him to come in before sunset. She remembered the time Buckshot got spooked by a thunderstorm and Jacob walked 3 miles beside him, refusing to ride, just so the horse wouldn't be scared. They trusted each other like family. But trust hadn't stopped the accident. Jacob had been gone 6 years now, and Dot still hadn't forgiven herself. That morning, she'd begged him to pick up feed before the frost came in. If she hadn't asked, maybe the truck wouldn't have slid. Maybe Buckshot wouldn't be all she had left of him. "I should have been the one on that road," she whispered now, her voice cracking. A sudden cough from Buckshot brought her back. He shifted again, hooves scraping weakly against the dirt. Dot placed both hands on his shoulder, steadying him. "Easy, boy. I'm here." She didn't know how much longer he could fight. She didn't know if she had the strength to lose again. But she also knew, as sure as her name, that she wouldn't leave his side, not now. Then, from across the road, a truck pulled into the driveway, headlights cutting through the morning fog. Dot narrowed her eyes as the door opened and a tall, weathered man stepped out, holding a worn vet bag in one hand. She didn't recognize him, but something about his face made her heart stop cold. He looked just like Jacob. Dot's breath caught in her throat. The man stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching softly on the gravel, and for a moment it was like time folded in on itself. He wasn't Jacob, couldn't be, but the resemblance was haunting. The same high cheekbones, the same calm eyes, even the way he stood with his hands resting at his sides, like he didn't want to startle anyone. Dot's fingers tightened around her cane. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and gentle. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced. Name's Dr. Eli Carter. I'm a large animal vet, new to the area. Clayton Briggs sent me over. Said there was a horse here worth seeing." He paused, taking off his hat. "And a woman who doesn't give up easy." Dot swallowed, her throat dry. For a second, she almost asked him if he had a brother named Jacob. But instead, she nodded and motioned toward the pasture. "He's over there. Buckshot. He went down last night. Thought he wasn't gonna make it." Her voice wavered as she said it, and she hated that it did. The man nodded, already moving toward the fence, his bag swinging at his side. As Eli knelt beside Buckshot, the horse lifted his head weakly, sniffing the air around the newcomer. "Well now," Eli said softly, running his hands over the gelding's legs, checking for swelling, pulse, infection. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" He worked in silence for a few minutes while Dot stood back, arms folded across her chest, watching him with narrowed eyes and a heart she couldn't quite steady. "He's dehydrated and weak," Eli finally said. "But there's no infection. He's not in acute distress anymore. I think he's got more time in him, if he's got someone to help him heal." He looked up at Dot then, and there it was again, that unbearable familiarity. She blinked hard, feeling the burn of tears rise again. "You remind me of someone," she said before she could stop herself. Eli's brow furrowed slightly. "I get that sometimes," he said quietly. "I'm adopted. Never knew my real folks. Always figured there was someone out there I looked like." He gave a small, sheepish smile. "Guess it might be you." Dot's knees nearly buckled. She reached out for the fence to steady herself. The wind picked up just then, brushing past them both like a whisper from the past, and suddenly, the ache in her chest wasn't just grief. It was recognition. Dot sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of coffee she hadn't touched. The sun had risen fully now, spilling light through the dusty curtains and casting warm shadows across the faded linoleum floor. Eli sat across from her, hat resting on his knee, eyes scanning the room like he'd been there before in another life. Buckshot was resting out back, a little stronger now. But neither of them mentioned the horse. The silence between them was heavier than words. "I'm sorry if I startled you earlier," Eli said finally, his voice calm but cautious. "You just looked like you saw a ghost." Dot's eyes didn't meet his. She stared into the coffee like it held the answers. "You said you were adopted," she murmured. "Do you know where you were born?" He shook his head. "Only state records. Texas. Mid-80s. Never had much reason to dig deeper until recently." Dot's fingers trembled slightly as she reached into a drawer beside her and pulled out an old wooden box. She set it gently on the table and opened the lid. Inside were a handful of photographs, some of Jacob as a boy, others of him as a teenager with Buckshot. She handed one to Eli. "This was my son, Jacob." Eli took the photo carefully, his brow tightening as he studied the boy's face. "He looks like me," he said softly. "Almost exactly." She nodded. "He passed 6 years ago. Tractor accident." Her voice wavered. "But before that, he told me something once. Just once. Said he had a girlfriend back in Amarillo when he was 17. She got pregnant and left. He never saw her again. Said he didn't think she wanted him involved." Her hands folded in her lap. "I never thought much of it. It hurt too much to ask." Eli sat back, the photo still in his hands. His heart thudded in his chest. "My mother told me I was born in Amarillo," he said, more to himself than to her. "She died before I could ask her much. Everything else was just silence and paperwork." Dot's eyes finally lifted to his. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What if you were his?" The room felt frozen, like time had slowed to a crawl. Eli didn't speak. He just stared at the photograph, then at Dot. And in that quiet moment, with the wind brushing gently through the cracked window, something unspoken passed between them. They both knew the answer, even if no test had been done. The house had never felt so full and so quiet at the same time. Dot sat on the porch swing as twilight settled over the land, casting everything in soft blue hues. The creaking of the chain links echoed in the air as she rocked slowly, the photo of Jacob resting in her lap. Inside, Eli moved gently around the kitchen, fixing tea like he'd lived there his whole life. He hadn't asked to stay, but Dot hadn't asked him to leave, either. She couldn't stop looking at him. Every now and then, he'd glance her way, and there was something in his eyes that went beyond resemblance. It was something deeper. Something familiar. She knew it in her bones, the way a mother knows things long before proof. "I keep thinking," she said softly as he stepped outside with 2 mugs in hand, "how many years we lost. How close we were without ever knowing." Eli handed her the tea and sat on the top step, his elbows resting on his knees. "Maybe," he said, "but maybe we're here now because we were supposed to be. Buckshot, Clayton, all of it. Feels like something pushed us both here." He paused, then smiled faintly. "Feels like Jacob's still doing the steering." That made Dot laugh, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard in her own voice in years. It cracked something in her chest, a release. "I don't know if I deserve to know you," she said, her voice faltering. "I couldn't save Jacob. I spent years grieving, alone, shutting out the world. Maybe I was too broken to see what life still had to offer." Eli turned toward her, eyes steady. "And I don't know if I deserve a second chance at family. But I've been looking for something my whole life. Not money. Not success. Just roots. And I think I found them." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees and the worn American flag hanging by the barn. Buckshot let out a soft nicker from the pasture, still resting but watching them with calm eyes. Eli looked out toward him. "I didn't come here to find you," he said. "But I think I needed to." Dot reached over and placed a hand over his. It was warm, trembling, but sure. "Then let's not waste what we've been given," she said quietly. "There's still time. Not for everything, but for something." And as the stars began to dot the sky, mother and son, connected by grief, love, and a horse that refused to give up, sat side by side, not as strangers, but as the beginning of something long overdue. The seasons shifted quietly. Autumn came like an old friend. Crisp air, golden fields, and the rustle of leaves dancing across the porch. The repairs on the barn were nearly done. The roof no longer sagged, the paint was fresh, and the old fences had been mended with steady hands. But it wasn't just the land that had been restored. Something inside Dot had changed, too. For the first time in years, her house no longer echoed with emptiness. Eli had stayed. What began as a few nights turned into weeks, then months. He helped feed Buckshot, fixed broken boards, and planted wildflowers near Jacob's old training path. They hadn't done a DNA test. Neither of them needed it. Every gesture, every glance, confirmed what they already knew. Blood didn't have to be proven when the heart recognized its own. Buckshot had gained strength slowly. His ribs were no longer sharp against his coat, and the tremble in his legs faded with time. He would never run again like he had with Jacob, but he walked with purpose now, especially when Dot stood by the fence, calling his name in that familiar whisper only he understood. She knew he was holding on for her, and in some quiet way, she was holding on for him. One chilly morning, Dot found Eli in the barn brushing Buckshot's mane, sunlight streaming through the slats like gold. "You ever think you were meant to find him before you found me?" she asked gently. Eli looked over, smiling. "I think he found me first. Led me here." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the warmth of old wood and the sound of breath, human and horse, steady and at peace. Later that week, they buried Jacob's old belt buckle beneath the tree where he used to train with Buckshot. It wasn't a ceremony. No speeches. Just shared silence, a few tears, and a hand placed gently on bark and memory. For it felt like closing a door that had remained half open for too long. Not shutting it in pain, but in peace. That night, Dot sat on the porch swing again, Eli beside her, Buckshot grazing under the stars. She reached over, her hand resting on Eli's arm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding your way back." Eli looked at her and smiled, not as a visitor, not as a stranger, but as a son. And for the first time in decades, the house on the hill didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like home.